So we were out there in this fort. There was the trainer guy. He had blonde hair, suit, tie. We're jumping up on the fort house thing. It was great. So the funny thing is, though, it's like we were impressed with his cell phone for some reason. So he must have been an alter. I mean, because there wouldn't be any reason why we'd be amazed with a cell phone, even though they didn't have them back then. But, you know, we were used to like using high-tech bendable screens and devices on missions and stuff. So, because if you think about it, we never had phones. We just had signals, and that's all we went by. Our body just responded to the big lattice network that was out there. And then the more lethal we became individually and as a team, the more time we'd get to spend with each other. And we had this machete, and we'd go make a path, and we'd go like exploring out there, and they gave us these weird tools, and we put like marks on all the buildings, and some of them, to me, I think were otherworldly marks to put my signature on something or remind myself of something. So we went around and did stuff all day and tried to use these like energy tools to get into the door or the building. And I can't remember how we did some of this stuff, but we did actually go into some of the doors with these tools and ended up on the other side, and thought that was pretty cool. So we did a lot out there, but we still did not know how to get out. And we just made the best of it in that woods and then back at Resident Evil house. What else can I say? Back at the schoolhouse incident with Bush, those two boys that were sitting there that didn't get killed were Ogtellas and Quicksilver, because they were sitting next to those two kids. So, I mean, the two kids that were there, they were just new. Like, they'd drop off new kids sometimes, and I'd be in charge of them, and they had, like, trucks. I'd see new kids, trailers driving around, kids in the back of them, dead kids. But the really worst memory I have is of seeing Lane driving in the back of this empty army truck in the morning when two of the guys came to pick him up, and then I'd have to look him in the eye and tell him like how great he was, how strong he was, knowing full well what was going to happen to him and what was going to go on there, and then see the changes that occurred in him when he came back. Because it really was our home, and it was our gilded cage, and we grew attached to it on many levels. I mean, they had me and 11 so bonded, and Lane, that if they separated us, we'd go into like solitary, like isolation, like severe depression, where we couldn't be functional. So the only way that we really were optimally functional was together. And that's how, part of the reason why we stayed together. Because they'd always put scenarios together to try to separate you if they didn't want you with someone, and set you up. And then it was just mind games and a lot of betrayal and a lot of psychological manipulation. So really it was like we would have to recognize the true self in each other when we did hang out, to be able to forgive one another. And it was healthy for our sanity to do that, because if we didn't have that, we didn't have anything. So no matter how much it hurt to be out there, we still came back together and had to forgive each other. So we had coping mechanisms on our own that would keep each other, your core and your realization of who that person was intact, so you wouldn't forget that. Because a lot of it was blurry, and sometimes I was out there, I couldn't even differentiate my realities. Like, I'd call one kid my nephew's name because he looked like my nephew back home, or he had the same name. I'd have like mental bleed-throughs or glitches and act really off sometimes, and demanding, and switch my tempo from one thing to another, trying to figure out what was happening. So I'm just sharing these things because I know somebody else has experienced the same types of traumas. And Zacchaeus was the only other one that I knew of who talked about the headless memories. I've talked about decapitated AI heads hooked up to the organic beast system and how satanic that is, and how I've seen certain scenarios with decapitated heads, but there's no blood because they can drain all the blood out of something. They have lasers, high-tech tools to do this, even extraction methods and such, you know, cattle manipulations. But besides from that, I did figure out a lot of things out there, and the whys and hows, and how to dissolve the false reality constructs and those timelines. Because really what happened is we manifested without the tower. In the end, that's what happened. So what we did was we became a projection, because that tower, it was just an instructional device, like a robot, eventually, that we shut down, on or off, and turned on and off by ourselves in the end, because we knew it so well. It's like, it's an artilect. One of the originals. It's like the tower was R2-D2 and we'd be like CB3O, trying to get away from it and then just spin our wheels until we finally got our shit together and then hightailed it out of there. Or we'd do something in the future timeline to cover up our tracks so they couldn't figure out what we did. And then it was like a competition of smarts between us to see who could outdo the other kid, because we knew it would help the whole thing dismantle. This whole monster system dismantle and then shut down eventually. So yeah. Also, rewinding back to the clone apartment building, Resident Evil, which it was. They had us put in there by the time we were 18, and that was a way to confine us and to terrify us, not only in our dreams, in our real bodies, but also in clone bodies to do the loop mechanisms. So this place, excuse me, it had 2 stories, like I said, and there was this red carpet in it, and it was dim lights. There were sounds going on and off at different intervals, different types of light flashes, like very dissociative, and it was individually paired for each person too, in the sequence and the scenario that you were in, because I don't think we all experienced the exact same thing there. So there were sequences that were there, and it was really eerie because, you know, we were assets, we had schedules. Like I'd go out in the morning with sunglasses on and some sun hat, and even our skin was sensitive to sun. And this black car would pick us up. And I remember being there one night and I had a psychotic breakdown and I was flipping out and screaming, keeping others awake. And Lane, who was in the apartment with me, that shared it with me, didn't know what to do with me. And I was just saying, like, my body doesn't feel right, and I didn't feel right, and I was getting headaches and all these aches and pains. So there was this tan phone on the wall, and I was calling on the phone to the main house, mainframe, and the 2 guys, of course, were there, and Lane thought that beer would help, and, you know, sometimes they bring stuff over for us, or food even, but I could hear them laughing at me on the other end of the phone, because I was like threatening to cut their faces off and shit. I was just really pissed off for being stuck in this loop mechanism. So when I went down and I figured out how to get out of the nightmare and got us all memory wiped, he took it as betrayal. I remember trashing the place, and I also remember us bonding that night. Like, it was the intensity that it was from the first time we had gotten dropped off there when we were kidnapped as kids and put into the pink dorm facility, and then we held each other for days until they separated us. And what I was doing, I already had a plan in my head, so I was memorizing every detail of his face and made him do the same with me, because I knew that everyone wouldn't possibly remember each other after this certain day. And it killed me leaving, because we were utterly Stockholmed and I didn't want him to forget me. So it was It was a strong love, and I don't even know if I'll ever find a love like that again. So, I don't know. We just promised that we would never marry anybody else that night. And we were willing to sacrifice everything to stay together, even if it meant not being in our original bodies and being tormented in a hellish domain. And if that's what it meant. So that's pretty phenomenal, the lengths that you'll go to with to somebody. That's a strong love. But I wasn't having it. I just wanted everybody to be free and myself. So morning came and the two guys came in, and they'd have control of your eyes even. Like a lot of us sometimes we're just looking up, or we'd be looking this way or that way. You couldn't make eye contact unless it was approved of. They'd tell you sometimes it's okay to look at me or this and that. So I remember them giving me 2 white pills, and then I got into this personality mode and vehicle. But this apartment building was just crazy. There's lights in the hallways in the morning, signals, sounds all the time, and it seemed like just traps, like this lattice pattern. And an Og Tellas they had there, but he was this tall, like silent clone that didn't say much, and he was pissing me off because he didn't say much, he never helped you, and he'd just look at you like something was wrong with you a lot. That's why we all remember him as being tall, because he's not tall at all. It was just surreal, like them charging exactly $11 to tour the lighthouse and all the steps and buildings you go into, and then you have deja vu and recall it all over again. So I always thought it was a nightmare that I'd wake up from, because one time in the hallway, Levin was trying to talk to me and tell me that it would get better, and we were so drugged. Whatever was wrong with us. I think this is right after I saw these Plum Island beasts, dogs, whatever you want to call them, on steroids, whatever they were feeding them, rip apart somebody. So I think I tried to bite her and couldn't communicate for some reason. And so when I saw that building and the compound, this all came back. And it would start out in the same place, the scenario. And what it would be is you go into this middle room in the upstairs hallway in this door. And this was, I believe, to train us to do 360-degree combat. And it was on many levels, spiritually, physically, mentally, the whole gambit. There was a black-haired lady that would stand in front of this window, and it had a really, really tall window for some reason, and then really long drapes. It was 2 red and purple drapes, and it represented ultraviolet, because it was something about playing with the ultraviolet spectrum, and something like lasers, or I can't really put my finger on it, but it was something with some lattice ultraviolet spectrum. And then there would be these attacks on all sides of you that were spiritual, but the whole end of this loop would be to be able to kill the dogs that were outside of this building. And they were just it was like killing 2 monsters. And if you didn't do it right, or if you thought about escaping or something that they didn't like, they would send you right back to the same spot and the same loop, so it'd start all over again. So just know that some people's stories are just stolen movie scripts and filed away secrets, but they belong to real people whose hearts and minds were taken, and then they fought with everything they had to get those parts of themselves back again, and to keep it all together. Because I never abandoned anyone. I made choices for the greater good, like a leader should, and I'm not sorry for what I did. Because when you're about to do something that's going to change and alter the course of history, you don't tell anyone. It didn't alter anybody's past, but it ripped us out of the present confinement modes that we were in and propelled us towards a better future. It's so that we could have a hope for a life and a better future, even if it meant nobody would even remember each other again. I was willing to take that risk. So, if we continued to make the right choices and grasp the fullness of the spectrum that we envisioned, we all could have been on board, but we weren't, because there was a split. And I was basically by myself at the end, and Yeshua is the one who led me out. And I had faith and hope in him. So what happened there projected us towards attaining better lives. Because they were trying to get me to join certain factions, and I don't think I did. For one, I was very socially awkward, and I didn't know how to function, or didn't want to do the things that would be required of me to gain that wealth. So I was willing to go back into confinement to keep my soul, basically. And I think this happened in the borders of Croatia. But you are only responsible for your own actions and energy, and no one else's. And, all of us there, we were in tune with different dimensions, each of us. And what came out of those dimensions was a reflection of what was inside of us. And I chose to walk in the light, even if it meant dying, trying to dial up help from on high, and call in the cavalry. And the call was answered, and we did get help. And, not many of us even realized what had happened, because there was more than one war out there. I have just flashes of memories seeing a reptilian in the underground base, and there was water everywhere and electricity and stuff going off, and his pants are ripped because he just had blue jeans on and one of those baseball caps. And I blasted him with something. But not many of us realized the full extent of what had happened, because it happened so fast, and it collapsed all those false timelines consecutively, and all the constructs and illusions there. The web just shattered. So it's like to being in shock when you're in an accident, because we were in a flash intergalactic time battle across every dimension and keyhole used by any gatekeeper through all of space and time. It's basically a time war story. The end parts of it, the star maps and many other things that I can't get into right now, but they kept pushing us to go further, to go quicker, to go higher, and it backfired on them in overlapping complex ways that I can't even begin to explain. But just know that your memories are there. You just have to heal the mind first to access them, and I pray that you will allow the peace that passes all understanding to be let in.